Hello and welcome to Objective-C Programming lecture number 7. The single purpose of this lecture is to make sure you know how to do undoes and redos in your application. And this is module 1. So you probably know what undo is that magic combination that undoes something that you did and want to get back. It's usually Control-Z or Command-Z in Macs, and any good application allows user to do this. An even better application allows the user to redo actions. So if you undone something and you actually don't want to undo it, you want to go back to what you had before so you can get the step forward. And unfortunately, the real life doesn't have that, but I guess it's fine. You can implement this mechanism by yourself, and most of the time, it's not that complicated. You just have to get the idea. But we are lucky because we have all those wonderful things that come with Objective-C and come with Xcode, that come with all those frameworks in OS X, OS X, and we can take advantage of NSInvocation Manager, which allows us to make undos and redos really easy. The idea behind undos and redos in general is you want to remember all the changes, because if you want something to be undone, you have to know what it was. So you have to remember all the changes that happened to your model, to the application, to the data. The changes are the results of messages. So if something happened to your application, that means there was a message doing something. So actually you don't want to save the results, you want to save the messages that caused those results. So you want to actually save messages. But the problem is messages are actions, they are calls, they are not objects. You cannot put a message in an array or something unless you convert it to an object. This is not real conversion. It's not like you can convert a float into integer and you can convert the message into an object. No, but you can use something to save this message somehow and represent it as an object so that you can pass this object on, you can save this object, you can do stuff with this object. And luckily, we have another thing that starts with NS, and usually things that start with NS give you something wonderful. In this case, we have NSInvocation, and as well as NSInvocation Manager, it comes from next step. This class allows you to save a message, meaning everything about this message, the selector, the name of the message, the receiver, the object, or actually the pointer to the object that this message is supposed to go to, and all the arguments that were sent with this message into a single object. So you pack this whole thing into an object, and you can save this object. This is just like any other object. And one of the reasons this thing exists is there is a thing in this language which is called message forwarding. And this is exactly what it says. You probably know about this notion. You have these things in your phones, in emails. You can forward a message to somewhere else. In real life, with emails, for example, if you got the message, that's it. You got the message, but you can also forward it so that exactly the same message gets to somewhere else. In Objective-C, the idea of forwarding is right like this. If you are an object and you get a message and you don't know how to react to this message, you don't have a method of the same name, usually the idea is you want to raise an exception because you don't know what to do. This was probably a mistake. But before raising an exception, the messaging system checks if you, the object, have a method called forward invocation. In other words, it checks if you, by any chance, have some ability to forward the message you don't know how to understand to somewhere else. So if you do have this method, the exception is not raised, and the message is being forwarded. Actually, this method is being called, and whatever you put in that method will be implemented, will be run. Idea is, if you don't know how to react to the message, you probably might know someone or something that can react to this message. But if you don't have this method neither, if you don't have ability to react to the message and you don't have a method called forward invocation, then you don't have any other choice. You have to raise an exception because you just cannot react to this message in any way. So remember our application from the last lecture. We had this program with a table and 2 buttons, and we could create a new employee and we could remove an employee from the table, and you could change the name of the employee and the raise, the expected raise in salary. So suppose your user runs your application and does 3 things. It adds a new entry, it changes the name from unnamed person to Jon Snow, and it changes the expected raise of Jon Snow from default 30 to 20%. So if you have NSInvocation Manager working behind the curtains, you will see something like this. You will see 2 stacks. One stack for all the messages that you want to undo, you might want to undo actually, and the stack of redo messages, of all those messages that you undone but want to go back. So when the user hits the first button and creates a new entry, the message that was used to create a new entry is also used to create a new NSInvocation object. And that message is packed, but not that exact message, the inverse of that message. Because if you added something new and you want to undo it, you have to remove something new. So you need to create an inverse of that method and save it into undo stack. And this is what it is. The first thing is here in undo stack is the NSInvocation object, which is a message, delete record number 1. Then the user changed the name from unnamed person to Jon Snow. And inverse of that action will be changing the name back to unnamed person. So another message is generated and saved into an NSInvocation object, and the method it's changing the name of record 1 to unnamed person. And the same with the raise. The user changed the raise to 20, but default is 30. But rather, not the default that matters, but what was before 20. And before 20, it has 30. So this third object here is an NSInvocation with the message packed inside, which changes the raise back to 30. So user did these 3 things, and then it decided to undo the last one. So the user hits Ctrl-Z or chooses Edit Undo from the main menu, and then another message is put into redo stack, and that last message is removed from undo stack because, well, it's no longer there, it's undone. The redo stack should be the inverse of that undo message, or the original message that was fired the first time user changed the raise of Jon Snow. So we have the inverse of that function that we used in undo in redo stack, and it's set raise to 20%. And then the user hits undo again, and another message gets deleted from undo stack, and another message gets pushed into redo stack. So in undo, we're changing the name back to original, and in redo, we're changing the name, we can say changing it forward to Jon Snow. And then we hit undo again, we could do this add new record. From this point, you have everything visually as if you just run the application. You have empty table and no employees in your array. It's not just the table, it's not just the visual, it's of course the model itself. There are no entries in the array. But you have something in redo stack, and you can redo this all. And this will just make everything go back. You hit redo 3 times and you get back to this. So it's quite logical, right? It's obvious. So NSInvocation Manager keeps track of both stacks and adds and removes items automatically. So you don't have to worry about those stacks. You don't have to worry about memory and calling those stacks. The only thing that you need to do is provide with inverse invocations. So you need to give NSInvocation those inverse functions so that when something happens, it puts the inverse into undo. So simple example is here. You have a function that makes the temperature go up 10 points. So you change the temperature, of course, but then you have to say, hey, undo manager, the inverse of what I just did is this method. And we are saying here, undo manager, prepare with invocation target self. So the target of that invocation, the target of the method that should be called when you want to undo is me, it's self, it's the object where this happens, the instance. And then I pass the name of the message, the name of the method that should be called if I want to undo this action. And then, of course, I have to provide to implement this same method. So here's the method, make it colder. And obviously, it does -10 to the temperature, is the inverse of this. And of course, I have to do this again. I have to say, well, to undo this, I have to call make it hotter. Now, NSInvocation is really smart because even though they look the same, if you hit make it hotter first, then this will be undo. But here we have the same line, but of course calling the other method. It knows which is undo and which is redo. So if I want to redo, even though this is the same undo manager, this method will be called if I want to redo after that undoing. So there's no redo NSRedo manager, it's all called NSInvocation manager, and it keeps track of both undo and redo. So all those invocations are grouped by event. So if one single user action makes multiple things change, then all those changes will be undone by a single undo. So if you have a button which changes multiple labels, then undo will change all those labels back because this was a single user action. Also, most of the applications we write are visual and they have this thing called main menu. It's that menu on the top. And that menu has default items like file, edit, window, etc. In the edit, we have that undo and redo, and all the applications we were building before, if you try to run undo, you wouldn't succeed because those items are disabled. You cannot do undo. But if we have undo, we will be able to call them, to click on them. By default, they all just called undo and redo. And the good application also tells you what action are you about to undo if you go to that menu. So a good application will say undo edit or undo delete item something. So we can add that action name to the menu by doing this, undo manager, set action name, and then something that will be added to undo or redo. And we will see the example of how we do it in the following modules. Thank you.